Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to participate in your conference this afternoon. I am Judge Kim Brown. I'm from my office is in Columbus, Ohio. Our court is in Franklin County, Ohio, where we are a jurisdiction of 7 judges that were all elected, not appointed. And our jurisdiction is juvenile and domestic work. So I wanted to give you a little bit of a background uh, this afternoon on our court's efforts to transform our probation department. The title of my presentation is Rehabilitation, Not Punishment, Transforming the Juvenile Court. And I believe that we're on the precipice of doing that. So let me just give you a little bit of information besides our jurisdiction. Like I said, it's half domestic relations and half juvenile, and all 7 judges participate in both jurisdictions. So half of my docket is spent with divorces and dissolutions and child support and things of that nature, and half of my docket is spent on custody and delinquency actions and abuse, neglect, and dependency actions and things of that nature. So obviously most of our probation transformation efforts centered around what we were doing with our delinquency dockets, what was going well and what was not going so well. So I have been actually to Nebraska before through JDI, so I'm aware that some or most of you are familiar with JDI and you know what the JDI work is. Here in Franklin County, we are a population of 1.3 million people, and our JDI participation as a state started with 5 counties. It was Franklin County, which is my county, Cuyahoga County, which is Cleveland, Ohio, Lucas County, which is basically Toledo, Ohio, Montgomery County, which is Dayton, Ohio, and Summit County, which is that Akron-Canton area. Where the Football Hall of Fame is. So ours is the largest at 1.3 million people, and we started our JDI journey here in Ohio with those 5 counties. We're now up to 15 of our 88 counties, and we are designated as an Ohio site. That may sound relatively small to have 15 of 88 counties, but all of the major counties are represented. So pretty much in terms of the population of the state goes, we have probably more than 70% of the population represented by a JDI site, and all of the juvenile detention centers represented. So again, our journey began in 2009. And initially with our basic JDI efforts, and we're also a deep end site as well. We have been, making some major strides. We cut our admissions to our juvenile detention center here in Franklin County significantly. And on all the numbers and information I'm going to give you is specific to Franklin County. It doesn't involve the other JDI counties here in Ohio. But we cut our admissions to our detention center from close to 4,000 in 2003 all the way down to less than 800 in 2019 through our JDI efforts. We reduced our DYS admissions, which is our Ohio Department of Youth Services admissions. We reduced them significantly by more than 50%. We reduced our felony adjudications to 42%, strictly by working with local law enforcement, working with the prosecutor's office, working with the public defender's office. In Franklin County, we have our own public defender office, and every child in Franklin County who is facing a delinquency adjudication is presumed to be indigent. So there are court-appointed counsel for every child that faces delinquency in Franklin County. Now, not every Ohio county has that situation, particularly in the rural jurisdictions of Ohio, but Franklin County is blessed to be able to have that designation. And working with our public defender's office, who represents our juveniles, and our elected assistant prosecutor, and the local police department. And there are many competing law enforcement jurisdictions in Franklin County, but the large one is Columbus Police Department, or CPD. We cut our felony adjudications down to 42%. We have educated the masses on the appropriate use of detention. There was a time back in the early 2000s where we were locking kids up for status offenses and for, truancies and curfew violations, and we have long since been away from that. Even before we started our JDI journey in 2009. We significantly address the school to prison pipeline by working with our largest school district in Franklin County. Columbus City Schools has over 50,000 students, and working with them, doing researches and summits and a lot of hand holding and education, we were able to reduce our admissions to the detention center coming from the schools specifically by 64% in a very, very short period of time. And we also reduced our average length of stay in our detention center. However, despite all that great success we were having, impacting DMC, or the disproportionate minority conduct here in Franklin County, was very elusive. As I told you before, Franklin County is 1.3 million people. And despite being 1.3 million people, only roughly 22 to 25% of our population is African American. So 1.3 million people, 22% roughly African American, and every statistic in our juvenile justice center has African Americans represented by at least 70%, and in some categories as high as 98%. So that was a tragedy. It remains a tragedy. It remains something that we're working on. But I give you that information so that you understand what prompted what is regarded as this very drastic attempt to impact our probation system. Let me give you a little bit of background about our former probation department. Our probation department is fairly large for a county. It was roughly 65 persons prior to March of this year. In the past, I was appointed first and elected the same year. So I have been with the court since January of 2002. And during that time, there have been 8 leadership changes in our probation department. And if you do the quick math, you'll understand that that's roughly once every 2 years. These folks suffered a new boss with a new vision and a new method, all of which centered around very, what I call cop-ish procedures, correction, surveillance, that sort of monitoring efforts. We spent more than $250,000. Just one second. Leslie, can you confirm through the chat that my feed is still live? Because I just got a notification that I was signed out by someone else. So I just want to make sure. Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So I was telling you about the training, our training budget. Our training budget for our former probation department was more than $250,000. And we sent them to various Annie E. Casey Foundation trainings. We sent them to different jurisdictions, such as Chicago, to monitor and learn. And nothing was seemingly making a dent. And so we as judges kept changing the leadership, thinking that, if we get a more dynamic leader, if we get a more progressive leader, if we get a leader who comes from a different sort of background, perhaps a social service background, perhaps we might get a change in attitude and approach to the job. We were very taken with the Chicago site, and I don't know if any of you have been there before, but that whole Annie E. Casey JDI initiative was very much probation driven. So we sent a lot of our probation officers, probably more than 40 of them, to go do a site visit with Chicago to learn how to drive that bus a little bit better. And that was almost 10 years ago. And still we were struggling. We were struggling mightily. We were struggling with proper reporting. We were struggling with monitoring our evidence-based programs. We were struggling, just delivering basic services to the youth in our jurisdiction. So in 2019, the first step along this process was we created what was called J-Court, which is Juvenile Court Oversight and Reporting. And it was J-Court's job to make sure that former probation was working with our JDI team and working with our performance team and working with the Department of Youth Services and working with the Ohio Supreme Court to properly document the money that we were spending and the money that we were receiving through grants and our programming and our outcomes and our initiatives. And that was pretty much the first step towards this transformation. Later in 2019, we started toying around with our diversion efforts. And just to give you some backdrop, in Franklin County, prior to the creation of PID, and I will describe what PID is in a bit, but prior to the creation of PID, our entire diversion effort funneled through our prosecutor's office. And I will just say that, we have a great relationship with our prosecutor, and he is a very excellent prosecutor, but he wasn't sold on JDI. He pretty much believed that we were going to cause chaos and pandemonium in the streets, and that our limiting the use of detention for folks who are kids who are basically AWOL or safety risk would be a problem. Prior to our involvement in JDI, I mean, if the prosecutor's office wanted a kid held so they could search them, interrogate them, interview them, or whatever reason, basically they expected the court to hold that individual. And at one point in time, our JIC, which is our Juvenile Intervention Center, it's a 132 bed facility, and at one point in time we were over 164 kids being held there, and the kids were sleeping on cots in our gymnasium. And so this was all pre-JDI, and through JDI efforts now we have I will put another caveat on that. Prior to COVID, we had an average daily population of about 50. So with the introduction of JDI initiatives, we went from 164 in our detention center, which is now called an intervention center, to an average of 50. Now, through COVID and some things that are just COVID related, we've bumped up a little bit, but not significantly. So to get back to the point, our diversion efforts formally ran through the prosecutor's office. So you can see that, that wasn't the best situation. So working with our lead juvenile judge, her name is Beth Gill. Some of you may have met her before. She's a fantastic lead juvenile judge. We created what we call the Police Initiated Diversion Unit. And this PID unit is situated so that they work, former POs, former probation officers, working directly with Columbus City police officers to identify kids that they believe, that police officers believe upon contact could be diverted from the formal process. And they would get to work together and hold the case for 90 days, work a case plan, which would then enable the child never to flip formal and appear before a judge. So we created this program and we pitched it to our former probation department, and we didn't get many takers. Our probation employees simply said, we're not interested in that. It's not in our current classification specification, and that's not what we signed up for. So we wound up piecing together and staffing the PID program, the Police Initiated Diversion Program, with led by JDI, with a couple of staff from our intervention center and a couple of staff from our youth education and intervention services program, and through a little tugging and pulling, we got maybe 2 of our 65 probation officers to volunteer to work it as well. And that program kind of struggled along. But it still wasn't making an impact because it still wasn't housed in the unit that it should have been housed in. I'm going to share my screen so that I can show you the table of organization as it looked prior to our joining into the situation. So I will show you the before and the after, and let me share my screen with you so you can see this. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen. Well, it looks like it's in process. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen. Okay. What's represented over here is the former probation department. And in the former probation department, you had a bunch of silos. And maybe I should make this just a little bit bigger so that you can see. Isn't technology great? Okay, give it a second here. Okay, good. All right, so I made it bigger so that you can see what was going on here. All right, so this is our old probation department structure, and this is the new probation department structure. And I'm going to ask you to disregard this title here because I'm going to explain what this is from in a little bit. But this is the actual presentation that we made to the probation department when we were explaining to them what was going to happen. And that was the working title. But I want to focus your attention over here. This is the old model. We had a court director, we had a chief probation officer, we had a DYS, which again is the Department of Youth Services liaison, and we had someone that ran our restitution and community services, and over here we had an assistant chief, and then we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 supervisor positions. And as you can see, some of the supervisors had a big staff, some of them had kind of a medium staff, and then some of them had a very small staff of people. All in total, there's about 65 boxes on this table of organization. And what you had was, in the old model, is you had people who would work in these individualized capacities. As you see here, this was for intensive probation officers. Here, this is for care coordination. And what care coordination was if you had to go through programming or counseling. This is the PSI supervisor group. So these were the people who were writing our pre-sentence investigations. Over here, you had a group of EMD officers, and all they did was link kids up with electronic monitoring devices and track them. Over here this is our ATC group that was called the Alternative to Commitment group. So when a probation officer could identify a youth that he or she would like to work with, they would ask the court or ask the magistrate or the judge for an alternative disposition so they could work with the child informally instead of committing the child to the Department of Youth Services. And then over here, we had kind of basically a clerical pool over here, just a pool of people who were relegated to clerical positions. So under the old model, what would happen is a family was assigned to probation. And depending on how the family interacted with probation, so you'd come in as a general probation kid. Say you picked up a new charge and you were deemed intensive. So you'd switch over then to a different supervisor and a different probation officer. And then let's say that we wanted to set you up with family counseling, independent counseling, and maybe drug counseling. Then in addition to working with the intensive probation department, you would also be working with the care coordination department. And say we didn't trust you yet, so we're also going to put you on EMD, so you have a different supervisor and probation officer for EMD to monitor your electronic monitoring device. And then if you still needed a PSI written, a pre-sentence investigation written, you'd still have to interact with this department over here as well. So it was a jumble for families, extremely confusing. You could be working with 3 or 4 different supervisors and 3 or 4 different probation officers at any given time. It was confusing. It was, with everybody scheduling appointments to meet. You could be being called down to the court to meet with a different probation officer or a different probation officer supervisor. Needless to say that, if you missed a meeting, it would be a violation of your probation rules, and you could get, you could get revoked for that. You could get locked up for that. So it was just pretty much a huge jumbled mess of services at this point. And this was the primary focus. This was the thing that we really, really wanted to fix for the families interacting with our youth, because they just didn't get it. They didn't understand it. They didn't get it. They didn't appreciate it. It was overwhelming to them. It was confusing to them. And as a result, we weren't getting great results out of probation. So what we found was that technical violations became the largest source of referrals to the detention center. In fact, 64%, and that's a pretty standard number through the years, 64% of the cases that were coming through the court, the kids that were sitting in juvenile detention, were due to technical violations and violations of their probation. And, we were very, very good as part of the JI initiative, very, very good in sharing the data. We would share the data, we would train our probation officers and the supervisors for years. We worked with them, and we kept hearing this recurrent theme of, well, that's not my job. These things that you want me to do that's not anything I'm required to do. It's that's not my job. And so, and just so you understand that I'm not disagreeing with them for that. I will show you the former probation officer specification here. I'm going to share my screen again. Hopefully it'll go a little faster than it did last time. But let me share my screen with you so you can see it. What the old spec looked like. This was our old probation officer specification. As you see that, it was paid, 8 to 5, and it was basically a $21 an hour job. And I would have you take notice of this, that this is the entire summary of their job. You're going to have a caseload of 15 to 25 probationers. You're going to assess their programming. And if you look at here, it's all about, you're going to monitor them. You're going to ensure their compliance with court orders. And, why we said that we were going to put an emphasis on cognitive behavioral therapy, we also talk about effective practices in correctional settings. We had a difficulty, and then what's the number one task here? Ensure compliance. Contact them via the phone or at home or school, treatment detention programs. It's very clinical. It's, file motions and warrants and violations for non-compliant youth, conduct arrests. I mean, it's very coppish. And that's what we used to do. Now, we did mention epics, but as I will show you here, I mean, it is the core competencies and knowledge, skills, and abilities, or KSAs. It just epics. You just need to know what epics is. And there was never really a strong commitment to, with the old probation officer title, to actually doing anything with epics. You just kind of had to know it. You had to embrace it, and you had to make sure that, I'm sorry, I need to stop. No, don't want to do that either. Sorry, I need to stop the share. You had to basically understand what epics was, but nobody was putting a whole lot of pressure on you to actually do anything with epics, and that was a big problem. JDI was not mentioned in that specification. PYD, or positive youth development, was not mentioned anywhere in that specification. And every time we tried to get our officers to redirect and try to move past the fact that, okay, it's not specifically there, but there is a thing called 10% other duties, and we consider it to be one of those 10% other duties. So I will tell you this, that prior to becoming a domestic relations and juvenile judge, my background was in employee and labor relations. From the time I was a second-year law student to the present, I have always had my hand in employee and labor relations. I worked for one of the biggest labor unions here in the state of Ohio, and then I went on to work for the state of Ohio in the Office of Collective Bargaining, and I also worked for one of the biggest agencies in Ohio as the Employee and Labor Relations Director. So that is my background and why I felt comfortable taking this on. So I'm going to ask Leslie to throw out the first poll here, and we're actually going to do the first two of them. So the first one is disproportionate minority contact a source of concern for your jurisdiction? And again, when I say a source of concern, are you like us, where you have a relatively small minority percentage population in your jurisdiction, but yet and still minorities make up a disproportionate amount of your caseload? So I'd like to see what the responses are to that first. So I would ask that you throw up the first poll. And then I'd also ask Leslie to throw up the second poll question, which is, do you work in a jurisdiction where some or all of your probation employees are unionized? Okay, so Leslie's giving me the poll results from question number one, and overwhelmingly you're saying yes, that disproportionate minority contact, 75% of you are saying yes, that is an issue for you as well. And I'm waiting for question number two. Only 29% of you said that you work in a unionized jurisdiction. Okay, we in Franklin County do not. There are plenty of unions in Ohio and in Franklin County, but not at the court. There are no unionized positions at the domestic relations and juvenile court in Franklin County. So that allowed us to simply comply with Ohio law for making these sorts of major changes, which is 60 days notice. And I'm going to show you kind of the pitch that I gave to my judges about what I wanted to do in just a second. But let me just say that because I am a labor relations background, it wouldn't have mattered to me whether or not we were unionized. We just would have followed the union contract to the T, and we would have conducted a reduction in force pursuant to the union contract. This was such a change in direction that we were seeking that we just felt that it was inherently unfair to just tell people, okay, we know you signed up for job one, but now you're going to do job two. We had been trying to get them to voluntarily go there for years, and it wasn't working. We had changed leaders, it wasn't working. And we had pretty much resigned ourselves that people felt that it was unfair to hire me. It's kind of like a bait and switch was kind of the description that they were using. You hired me in to do X, and now you're telling me I have to do Y or face disciplinary consequences. And we agreed with them. You know, you're right, that's not fair. We don't want you to feel that way. We want you to enjoy doing your work because you're working with troubled youth who are traumatized, who don't have stable home environments, and you know they don't need an angry court employee in their lives making things worse. So we agreed with them that we were going to do an overhaul, and we're going to do it in a fair way. So what we did was this. I'm going to share my screen again, hopefully. And hopefully you will be able to see this document. Looks like it's coming up. Okay. All right. So this was the process. I talked to the other judges, as I stated, and I told them my vision, and I told them that because we have such a big department that has been doing things one way for so long, that we really need to level the playing field, level the department, and start from the beginning. I call it phoenixing. We really do need to bring this up from the ashes. So I announced the intent to transform the department. I sent an email to all staff, and then I scheduled a staff meeting just for the probation department. Then I appointed the HR director to oversee a committee. And we created a 9-member probation transformation committee, and these were the components of the committee. We had probation supervisors, and we had regular probation officers, and we had an EMD officer, care coordinator, basically tried to represent a cross-section of the department as it existed. And we added our JDI director or her designee. I don't know, some of you probably know or have met Shuba Lembach. And she or her designee could sit in to kind of facilitate the conversations and make sure that everything was viewed through the lens of equity, inclusion, implicit bias, and make sure that we stayed focused on positive youth development, creating a process that would ultimately be child-led and adult-directed. This committee was tasked with fleshing out the framework of a vision statement and a mission statement. Before pretty much their vision and mission statement was lock them up. So we had to change that significantly. And they did a really nice job with that. I will read to you their mission statement, and their mission statement is the Juvenile Community Enrichment Services Department. They were also tasked with renaming the department if they wanted to, and they chose to. They chose the name of Juvenile Community Enrichment Services Department. And their mission is to support positive youth development and community wellness by guiding the youth and families of Franklin County towards a successful future in an equitable and inclusive manner. Their vision statement reads, Juvenile Community Enrichment Services vision is to positively impact lives one youth at a time. And that was a creation of this Probation Transformation Committee, and they also had to make recommendations on job titles, job descriptions, and what they thought were fair pay grades for the work that they were doing. During this program, I'm going to show you, during this process, I will show you the timeline. So the announcement of the court's intention to abolish traditional probation went out on November 30th of 2019. And the effective date of shutting down the department was announced as March 27th, 2020. We conducted a retreat in early October, and I'm going to go over the presentation that we made at that retreat. We gave them a deadline to apply to be a member of the probation transformation and a deadline for those selections to be made. Gave them a deadline for their submission of mission and vision statements to me, a deadline for their proposals for job pay and job descriptions. And then once I approved in all of the job descriptions, we posted all the positions and we stuck to this timeline. We did not deviate one day from this timeline once this timeline was announced on September 30th. Every deadline was met on time. During the first stages pre-posting, we offered training to all employees of the court, and the court has almost 400 employees. We offered training on ethics and motivational interview process, what JDI was, de-escalation techniques, Microsoft Word and Microsoft classes, business writing, and we also we also allowed our employees to use our $5,000 per year in tuition reimbursement. Now, typically, use of those funds is limited in one pay period, a $5,000, and also to jobs that specifically relate to a job at the court. But because we knew that many of the staff were probably just going to retire or resign, we offered up the $5,000 to be used for anything they wanted to do, whether they wanted to learn to be a chef, whether they wanted to learn a new trade, whether they wanted to learn something that was court related to get a new job at the court. We took all the restrictions off of it. Additionally, as with most employers who offer tuition reimbursement, we lifted the requirement that you had to stay with the court for 2 years or pay the money back. We said if you wanted to use $5,000 in 2019 and the other $5,000 in the beginning of 2020, which was $10,000 that was available to them in a 6-month period of time, we told them we're going to waive that limitation and we're not going to try to recoup that money from you if you decide to leave the court and pursue another vocation, or if you're not selected for the new department, because that's not your fault. So basically the desired outcomes that we were trying to do was remain ahead of the statewide movement for probation transformation and attack our disproportionate minority commitment number. And I pulled up the stats. In 2016, we were at 80% disproportionate minority contact. And when I say that, I am talking nearly exclusively African American men. At the time that we launched the probation transformation movement, that had been reduced to 78%, but still embarrassing for a community like Franklin County. And again, we were going to streamline the table of organization and streamline the functions, make them more user-friendly, and redistribute the money that is in the probation department in a more fiscally responsible way. And actually, it allowed us to increase staff salaries for the additional work that we were asking them to do once we opened up these jobs. So I am going to show you the presentation, but before I do, I'm going to ask Leslie to launch the fourth poll question about PYD and whether that's implemented in your jurisdiction or not. Okay, I don't have any responses just yet, so I think that I'm going to move on to the present. Oh, we're getting some now. Okay, so Question 4 yields the results of 11% say yes, we have implemented some PYD, and 86% say no. And 10 yes, 9 okay. 10% says yes, 90% says no. And we were the same way. So I'm not surprised. We were the same way. So let me share my screen with you once again. As I indicated, we scheduled a meeting. It was myself and Judge Gill and our HR department. We scheduled a meeting in December, the first week of December, to go over what's going on, because I sent the email out on November 30th, and then they had 2 weeks to kind of stew and get it in their heads as to what was going on. And then we took them offsite. We actually booked a park, a very pretty scenic park. We booked the shelter house and had refreshments and got together, and just to try to ease everybody's tensions and make them understand that this was a process that we've all along thought that they could join us in if they wanted to, but no hard feelings if you decide that you don't. We understand this is not the job that you signed on for. We're changing it, and so we're giving you a choice. So I'm going to walk through the presentation that I made with the employees, and focusing on why we should transform. And in a sentence, it's because kids don't deal well with traditional probation models. They're young, their brains aren't formed, they're saying young and dumb, given to impulsivity, given to reckless behavior, and this sort of conventional surveillance-based probation, it's ineffective. And we had decades of statistics in Franklin County since 2009, when we started working in the JDI work, doing the JDI work, and we were able to document and show how we had affected basically every other major category successfully, except for minority disproportionality, and that it wasn't working. And so we had to do something else. And again, wanted to do something that was designed to change their behavior, stimulate personal growth as an intentional intervention, as opposed to just watching and tracking and saying, oops, you screwed up, back to the detention center for you, or we're going to ramp up your level of supervision because you're just not behaved. We told you what to do and you're not doing it. It's almost nonsensical when you think about dealing with kids that way. Why abolish the positions? Well, as I'm going to go back to the table of organization in just a little bit, we wanted to create cross-functional jobs. I didn't want kids bouncing from the PSI writer interviewing me and my family, then the general probation officer interviewing me and my family, and then now I got some different person from the court here going through my house and strapping me with an ankle monitor, and oh well, I needed drug testing, so now I've got a fourth probation officer in my house scheduling me for probation. These parents are busy. They have multiple children, and I don't know how I would be able to, in my lifetime, with a job and multiple children, try to figure out which probation officer I'm dealing with today, what meeting, what appointment. It was just crazy. It was just something that we could not do. And if you yourself could not possibly do it, how would you possibly expect a child and his family to do it, his or her family to do it? So we wanted to be cross-functional and be cross-trained. We wanted to streamline and balance it. And we also wanted to drastically clarify department roles, responsibilities, and expectations, and then take a look at the pay structure and determine whether or not we thought that was fair for all the stuff that we were going to ask people to do. So, explain to them that the way that we were going to transform was to sharply reduce the number of youth placed on probation supervision. So one of the things that we did was we had misdemeanors and felonies on probation. And so right off the bat, we took probably 20% of their caseload and diverted it to our YEIS department. And that stands for our Youth Education and Intervention Services Department. So all misdemeanor offenders were immediately transformed out of what came to be called JCES, JCES, the Juvenile Community Enrichment Services Department. So old probation versus JCES. So we took all of the misdemeanors and kicked them out of JCES. So JCES only deals with felony level probationers. We were going to focus on family engagement, community partnerships with a race equity lens, and emphasize community safety, victim accountability, and offender rehabilitation. A lot of our former POs were very concerned that we were creating a cut and release program, a kiss and hug program, we kept hearing. And they were doubting that it would work. They were doubting that it would be successful because, you know, if you're not tough on crime, then crime is tough on you. And we were trying to make sure they understand that if you sign up for one of these jobs, you need to read your position description very, very carefully and be committed to doing the work as the way that we're structuring the work now. And we were going to, first and foremost, reserve probation for youth with serious and repeat offenses who require supervision and support. It's not going to be, you know, probation for everybody just because they've irritated us. All right, so I talked about the community transfer, or excuse me, the Probation Transformation Committee already and what they were going to do. So I will, again, reiterate a little bit of differences about the structure before and after. Again, disregard this CRS department, it is the JCES department, but this was the presentation that they were presented. So instead of the 10 supervisors, the yellow boxes represent 3 teams. And in these 3 teams, all functions are represented. So we reduced from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 boxes of supervision. Well, including this one, 9. These 2 are assistant chiefs, and the assistant chiefs do not have, if you noticed, any boxes below them. They are strictly grants administration and quality assurance. So grants administration is looking at the contracts, the programs, and services that come through JCES, whether they work, whether they're evidence-based, whether we have the documentation for them, what the families feel about them, running surveys with the families to find out whether or not the families feel that these programs are effective. And at the end of every year, we're actually doing it at the next judges meeting. We are evaluating the report of the grants administrator for the first time this year to look at, and they have highlighted the programs that are rocking and the programs that are a waste of public dollars, and the programs that are a waste of county dollars are getting stricken. And that's what the grants administrator does, to make sure that the programs that we pick for our kids are effective and responsible with public dollars. The quality assurance chief is more looking at the quality of the notes entered into the system by the specialists we don't call them probation officers anymore. They're now called community specialists, community enrichment specialists. We just call them specialists. But they are now looking at the quality of their notes, whether or not their notes are complete, whether or not their case plans are effective, monitoring basically the quality of their work and their reporting into our database. And I'll talk about the case plans in just a little bit. So we reduced the number of supervisors. There's now 3 teams, and our goal was to hire 12 to 14 specialists for each team. So if you count the boxes, you will see that this program had 64 employees. This version had 52 employees. And in actuality, we've only hired 44 of the employees for this department. We filled each position, but we stayed on the low amount in terms of the specialists that we ultimately hired. We ultimately hired roughly 34 specialists, so that was 2 teams of 11 and a team of 12. We are about to expand. We've just posted and filled for our fourth community our community enrichment specialist supervisor. So there will be a fourth team, and we're not hiring necessarily too many more specialists. We're going to redistribute the number of specialists so each supervisor has fewer people on their team to allow them to more effectively mentor. So we're still going to maintain the size of the department to 52 or less. We're just going to add another supervisor and spread out the team members a little bit more. This is a better look at what that new TO, table of organization, looks like. Like I said, there will be another supervisor here and a redistribution of these folks down here so that supervisors can work more closely with their folks. So, we encouraged all of our existing employees to reapply. And, we told them that Franklin County families, deserve your passion and your experience. And we went through that. We've invested a lot of money in them, through the years in training. And like I said, we spent almost $250,000, and this is actually kind of low. And we told them that we would get them ready to reapply with additional training and tuition reimbursement, and get them in the best possible position so that they could reapply for these positions. And again, encourage them to sign up to try to be on the transformation committee. And then gave them the deadlines for the transformation committee and reviewed with them the timelines for what was going to happen. So I will tell you that as a result, between February 10th and February 28th of this year, we conducted interviews for all of those positions. We conducted almost 50 interviews to produce the 34 specialists. And what ultimately happened was 23 of our 64 probation employees left voluntarily. 8 probation employees were not offered a position. 4 simply chose to not reapply and be laid off. So in total, we lost 35 of our 64 current employees. That's 55% of our staff was turned over. We extended all the offers, like I said, according to timelines on March 6th. We allowed the employees who were not selected to remain on payroll through the end of the month, but they did not have to report. We selected a director of probation, and it was the 9th director of probation since I had been there in January 2002. And like as I told you, teams 1 and 3 each have 12 specialists, and team 2 has 10 specialists. With diverting their cases, they each had roughly 13 cases. And if you remember on the specification, it said that, the original job had 15 to 25 cases. And through this transformation, we were able to reduce that, and they did on average have 25 cases. We were able to reduce that to each specialist having roughly 13 cases. And with the redistribution of the money, we were able to give each employee roughly a $4 per hour raise for the work that they were doing. And that was all on March 6th. And then the following week, COVID hit. So we didn't get to do anything with our newly formed team until June, when we brought everybody back. And from June 1st of 2020 until October of 2020, we have been, getting people in their positions, and they've been working on their case plans. I wanted to show you what the old rules of probation look like. And Let me share my screen with you. Okay, so this is what, nope, no, sorry, just a second, hit the wrong button here. This is what the old rules of probation look like. So what would happen is, if at the result of your hearing, at the court hearing, you as a youth were being put on probation, we would have you come over to a table, and either the magistrate or your attorney would read over these rules of probation with you. And again, it's all, you got to comply with your case plan, and you don't have any illegal activity, and here's your curfew, and follow your rules of home and school and placement, do not be truant, no new charges, comply, comply, comply. And then on the bottom, there's a whole bunch of scary language about our ability to search your vehicle, search your property, search your residence, see you at school, search your locker. It's just really, really scary. And so you just had a hearing, you were just adjudicated delinquent, and we tell you to walk over to a table in the corner of the courtroom while somebody reads over these rules with you, and then we forced the child and the parent to sign the rules, and congratulations, you just joined probation. And they were given a copy of it, but many of our families would violate on EMD on the way home, simply because they stopped at McDonald's. Well, our EMD machines, our electronic monitoring machines, require you to go straight to your home, and if you stop through a drive-through, if you stop anywhere, it comes across as a detour. And so it was very intense, needlessly so, very stressful for our families, and oftentimes they botched it before they even got out the door good and got back home. Our new process is, after a court hearing, the judge reads a script that tells them that they've been assigned to work with the JACES department, and the judge or the magistrate. You've been assigned to work with the JACES department. You are going to be contacted within 5 days by our JACES specialist, and they will come to your home and work with you and your family on a plan, a goals plan. And in these, they call them goals and success plans now. And in the goals and success plans, the specialist works with the family to identify root causes for the problems, whether it's peers or substance abuse or on board or whatever. And they set down this plan into writing. The parents give input about what their goals are for their children. Children give inputs about their goals for themselves. And the specialist is empowered to put together the plan that they feel will best fit this family. And everybody understands that the plan may be tweaked from here to there, then again to meet current existing needs. One thing that we found out was that we were having a lot of violations, just simply people not showing up where they were supposed to be when they were supposed to be there. So if I set you up for a doctor's appointment and there was nobody to get you to that doctor's appointment, that's a violation, because it's in your rules of probation that you will comply, and you didn't, and so it was a violation. So the other thing that the court did when it created the J-Corps department was create a service called Court Ride. And our J-Corps director worked with Yellow Cab Company of Columbus to get a contract that we're paying for with our reclaim dollars, which is funding from our Department of Youth Services, to provide transportation. We have a system where they fill out a waiver and an application to use Court Ride the minute that we have interaction with them. So through the police initiated diversion, if that's first contact, through arraignment, if that's first contact, through a court hearing, if that's first contact, we get them to fill out the Court Ride application, and just in case they need it. And if they need it, they have the ability to call up and get a ride to anything that is court ordered, including any activity that the specialist puts in that goals and success plans. So going back to PYD and what PYD is, we we want our youth to be involved in more pro-social activities. And PYD is that intentional strategy or framework to get young people to work on their emotional and moral and cognitive, physical development. So we may order you to join a team. You don't have to play, but at least it gives you a practice to go to every day. We may order you we may put in your plan to join a club. And that's great, but like my daughter, for instance, is at conditioning, and she's been at conditioning for the past hour. It started at 3 for softball. So if I'm at work, I don't, and she doesn't drive, I don't know how I can be expected to get her to softball practice. Well, any youth that's working with our YES department, the YEIS department, or our JACES department can use Court Ride to get to where they need to be. And it's free of charge. The cab will come to your house or to your school. It will take you home, or it will pick you up and it will drop you off where you need to be at practice and pick you up from practice on time and take you back home, so that we can get these kids moving down this route of a more positive interaction with the court and things that are good for them emotionally and cognitively and physically and, again, morally. Whether it's after school study table, get a ride home from school from that, or after chess club, whatever the specialist writes in that goals and success plan, we can facilitate transportation for the youth with or without the parent, including rides to court. Again, COVID put a kibosh on a lot of things, but the kids are still using Court Ride to go to their appointments and to their activities at school. We don't have them coming down to court very much right now. Lots of things are being done via Zoom, but that's part of the case plan as well. So I'm looking at the time. It's 4:02. I've talked a long time. I want to do one more question number 5 in terms of the poll, and I want to open it up to any questions that you might have. So I'll ask Leslie to roll the last question about whether you're interested in learning more or working with somebody from our site about this, and then I will watch the chat and see if anybody has any questions for us or for me. I'm glad everybody was interested in it, and that's great. I have contact information, and what I would like to do is to kind of report back our findings. Like I said, we got hit with COVID, and our court was officially not down, but we called it curtailed operations from March 13th. Yeah, Friday the 13th, March 13th, and we brought everybody back the first week of June. But at first, because we still were under our governor's orders not to visit people in their homes, our JACES specialists were all deployed doing other things at the court. Most of them were deployed being court navigators to help people come in the building and get to where they were supposed to be and make sure that they were being safe and socially distant. They just began coming off their probationary periods. That's one thing I didn't mention. With any new job at our court, people are subject to a 6-month probationary period. And we had some people who were existing employees who bid on positions in our JACES department and were selected. They had strong interviews, and they had read the position description, and they said that they were committed to the new model. And as it turned up a few months into their probations, which were all extended by the 3 months that we were out for COVID, we started hearing again, well, I didn't sign up for this. They weren't saying it wasn't my job anymore, but some of them said, I didn't sign up for this. And, it's too much work, and I don't want to do this. And so probably another 10 of those employees were probationarily removed. So I remember I told you that we lost 35 of our 64 initial staff. We lost probably another 10. Some of those were new hires, but probably 7 of the 10 were existing employees with the court, and those positions were rehired again. So we have now a full complement of staff. Like I said, we're about to hire our fourth team leader or supervisor. And in about 6 months, I would be happy to either send Leslie some information to update you on whether we're seeing changes and what changes we're seeing. We are tracking our data very, very closely, as you can imagine, just to make sure that the changes that we've made pay off. I have no doubt that they will, based upon how all the other changes that we've made pursuant to JDI have borne out in our county very, very successfully. So I don't have any reservations whatsoever that this one will too, that we'll see an increased amount of participation in hearings, an increased amount of participation with our young people in programming, additional pro-social activities, and fewer detentions. We here in Franklin County have experienced during COVID a bit of a boost. It's beginning to go back to normal numbers now, but we experienced a bit of a boost in gun violence. And the court is working with local officials, the city of Columbus, the police department, to figure out what is going on, whether it's, just a period of people being COVID crazy from being locked up inside and or whatever it is. But we're working on that right now with the CPD and city leadership to make sure that we're keeping our kids safe. And again, with parks closing and no sports and no clubs and kids not in school, I guess it should be to be expected that they're going to find other things to occupy their time, and those things aren't necessarily healthy for them to do. So we're thankful that school is back, at least on a hybrid basis. Our major school district, Columbus Public Schools, will be reopening at the first of the year. And we're hoping with that we'll get kids involved in more activities that are pro-social and less about kids doing things that are not pro-social. Going on to just to talk a little bit about PYD. PYD being grounded, positive youth development being grounded in this desire to help young people become more resilient and able to bounce back from their setbacks. And you know how that's done. You have to have strong peer associations. You have to set clear, fair, and high expectations for their behavior. And you have to give them opportunities to connect and navigate, the waters and be productive. Those are all things that we as young people were given the opportunity to do. And that was one of the main reasons why our court undertook this transformation, because it seemed like the old model of probation was essentially criminalizing bad behavior. I don't know how many of you never got suspended from school and never smoked pot and never was late from home and never shoplifted. Most of us did those things, and we still turned out to be successful, contributing members of our societies. But in this day and age, when kids get caught doing these things, they're slammed pretty hard legally for doing them. Everybody has a zero tolerance, low threshold for youthful behavior, behavior that statistics will show most kids simply age out of. And pro-social, a PYD approach to things gives kids, the leeway to be kids and learn to grow out of these sorts of behaviors. So that is the impetus of why we wanted to go down this road. And I'm really sad that COVID pretty much sidelined us for the first 6 months of our rollout. But I think that we're back on track now. And hopefully 6 months from now, we will have some concrete data to share with everybody about how we're doing in Franklin County under the new JASIS model. So Leslie, do we have any questions, or are people just tired of being at a conference all day? No questions. Okay. Well, I'm kind of at the end of the presentation, and maybe then if there aren't any questions, it's a good time for a break for our participants. I will hang around here, Leslie, in like the private chat room. If anybody does have a question, I'll gladly respond to it. But I'm pretty much at the end of my presentation at this point. So I want to say thank you to everybody. And I enjoyed being here to talk about our little experiment here in Franklin County, Ohio. And, hopefully, like I said, in about 6 months, we'll have some concrete data to share. And I'll make sure to get this information to Leslie to share with you all. And again, if you want some more insight on PYD or things of that nature, just let us know. And we can certainly get you hooked up with resources there. If you would like to communicate with your counterpart in Franklin County, Ohio, we would certainly love to make that introduction for you. I'd like that. So I got your comment, Amy, and I'd like to do that. So that would be awesome. Okay. All right. Well, again, thank you for having me. It's exciting to talk about what we're doing here, and I wish you all the best of luck, and stay safe. You share some of the trainings and PYD policies that you are implementing. Okay. Aside from changing all of their classification specifications, we required epics. I don't know how familiar everybody is with epics, but the method of interviewing and implementing with children, that's been outlined. We have changed policies such as magistrate. We used to have a policy kind of open where the robe wearers could dictate what services they wanted the kids on their docket to do. And we're no longer doing things like that. Part of the not overlapping and compiling services on these families, that's part of our new policy where we will not do that. We will allow the robe wearers to say, you're going to work with JASIS, but we don't say you're going to be in intensive probation or, I want drug testing on this kid. We leave that to the JASIS specialist. That was a huge policy change for our robe wearers. They had to give up a little control to the JASIS specialists to sit down with the families and quit legislating from the bench, if you will, about, after a half an hour hearing, knowing what's best for you. Because we can't possibly know what's best for you until we get a chance to meet with you and your family and really come to terms with what's going on in your family and what's going on there and what you as a family believe that you need to be successful. We changed our warrants policy, and a warrant now requires a robe wearer, magistrate, or judge. And I should tell you, we have 15 juvenile magistrates in addition to the 7 juvenile judges in our jurisdiction. A JASIS officer can no longer issue a warrant on a youth. Just like the police officers have to come in and explain their warrants, the JASIS officers do too. That was a huge policy change because in the past, local law enforcement would ask the JASIS officers to issue warrants because they could get them faster. And the JASIS officers would just, or the probation officers would just issue warrants at law enforcement's directive. So that was changed. We changed detention practices that we rearranged the scores so that basically you have to have been charged with a felony of the first or second degree, assault on a police officer, or an offense involving a gun to be held. We had to change some of that criteria because, again, that was another workaround the system that our officers, or our local law enforcement was doing with former POs to affect holds on kids, which are contrary to JDI and PYD policies. So those are some of the bigger ones that we've implemented in the last 6 months. And do you have a sample of how the changed language and the probation orders from reflecting punitive mindset? Do I have a sample with here? I probably do. I can probably read you the script, and I can probably show you one of the plans. I don't know why I didn't think to have that up and ready to go. That's a great question. Here's one. Okay, hopefully I will be able to. I have two systems running here. One, my work system that's got and my home system. So hopefully I will be able to share. So I had to email it to myself, so hopefully it will pop within our allocated time frame. So while I'm waiting for that email to get through, let me see if there was anything else over here that I missed. So I'm hoping what you meant by the changed language in the probation orders, I hope what you meant was a sample of like the case plan. Was that what you meant? Good. Okay. Okay, I have it. And I will open it up for you in just a second. Again, isn't technology great when it works? Okay. Okay. Okay, so apparently the one I just pulled up, and let me share my screen, is one of the drafts. So what our JASIS officers have to do is, or excuse me, our JASIS specialists have to do is they have to give the draft of the case plan to their jurist. And then their jurist makes comments on it and edits on it, and then tells them whether or not they're good to go. So hopefully you can see my screen. And this was one that was given to me. And let me take out the kid's name at least. I don't really think that you should be seeing the kid's name probably. Okay. So this was a goals and programming plan, or sometimes they're called goals and success plans. And this was one of the very first plans that was submitted. As you can see, it's even before our transformation took effect in March. We told our existing POs, and that's why it still says officer, we told them to go ahead and start practicing. If you plan to apply for a job in the new department, you may as well start practicing now on writing your goals and success and your programming plans. It's very important. So this young man happened to be on my docket, and he was in my courtroom, and Roger Carter, who is an exemplary employee. He's been with our court for probably the past 22 years. He was great under the old model, and he's great under the new model. He's a leader in our court, and he started going through. So his summary is who the kid is. You know, this kid was detained in our detention center, and first off, the summary portion of it, Mr. Carter goes through and he explains, you know, his interview, what he learned, you know, that he has had problems throughout his life, his prior services, you know, talking with the parent, what the parent thinks needs to be happening with this young man. And that's a big diversion. If you recall our former rules of probation, you remember it was just, you're not going to do this, 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 sign it. And now the parent has an opportunity to participate in the meeting, talk about what she thinks her child needs. And then you see this section about what the goals that the child said he wanted to do. The kid wants to get a job because he feels like his family struggles financially. It's kind of got a snippet of his history. And then these are the goals that Mr. Carter came up with. And you'll see things like this where, you know, work on independent living skills. This youth indicated that he felt like he was basically a burden upon his family. And he wanted to be able to basically transition out and become successful and live on his own. He's 17 and a half years old. So the things that are in red were my comments back to Mr. Carter about, you know, things that I wanted him to beef up in his plan. But as you can see, instead of signing off on rules of probation, these were promises that Robert made to his probation officer and promises that the mother made to Mr. Carter, to schedule the help, to immediately contact Mr. Carter when you run into barriers. You know, oftentimes the family would just wait until the next court date. So if you were scheduled to meet with a therapist or to get your kid scheduled in therapy, and for whatever reason you're on a waiting list, or you called and you were put on a waiting list, or you called and they only had 2:00 appointments and you couldn't get your kid there, they would just wait 90 days to the next hearing and then say, well, I couldn't do it because X, Y, and Z. So that's a big push too, that to immediately call for help, that our specialists are no longer referees on the field. They're now coaches on the field, and your coach is there to help you successfully, score your touchdown. And if you're running into problems in your training, you're running into problems and you're practicing, you need to let your coach know so your coach can break down these barriers. So that's one of the new transitions and the new mindsets for JSIS. And then if you see down here some other action steps, all of the programs should have, talking about if work is an issue, if education is an issue, treatment and programming, mentoring, then these are all the things that Mr. Carter indicated that he wanted to do. And again, the red language is my edits on his plan back to him. So he would have shored up these very few deficiencies, in my opinion, and then presented the plan to the family for signatures. And at the bottom, you see where they all sign this. And I'm going to get back to that signature block in just a second. But if you see here, there are referral dates and, who the agency program is. And Mr. Carter was noting here that these are the referrals that he put out, and he was awaiting for an assignment so he could add the phone number. So all the people that they're working with and all the contact information is all there on one document for the family's ease and convenience. And you have to have reviews within 30 to 45 day periods. And down here, instead of all that scary language, it talks about that we're going to stop committing offenses, we're going to follow through with our promises, and we're going to make a good faith effort to take advantage of the assistance, the services being offered to you. And then we tell them, because we have to, that if you don't, there could be additional sanctions up to and including secured confinement. But again, moving away from all that scary law enforcement oriented language to more of a rehabilitation services mindset, and let me help you successfully navigate the system and reach your end goal. So that's what it looks like. And I'm sorry I didn't redact it, but we won't like I said, I took the kid's name off of it, and hopefully that helps answers the question that you had so that you could see kind of where they are. Your name is, yeah, it's being recorded. Yeah, we'll have to redact that. Love the do no harm attitude. Yeah, I appreciate that last comment. That's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to meet the kids where they are and help them identify what they feel that they need and absolutely do no harm. So good questions, and sorry I didn't have a redacted version of that for you, but apparently I'm going to have to get a release from Mr. McClendon for this. But anyway, hopefully you got some basic information about what we're doing here and the progress that we've made. And I, again, so happy to share what we're doing here. Very proud of what we're doing here in Franklin County. And again, I really, truly hope to have some more concrete information for you about what happens at the end of this journey, and hopefully six month period and the 12-month period and the 18-month period to share. So, all right, well, we're right at 4:30 now. So again, Leslie, if there's any questions that you'd like me to follow up on after it, you have my information and my phone number, my contact and everything. And then I would ask that you just forward them to me, and I would be happy to share with the participants any information that they want to know about what we're doing here in Franklin County, okay? All right, so thank you so much. You guys are a great audience. It's just a little weird. I wish I could be there with you in Nebraska. It's odd doing things by Zoom, but we all have to be safe. So again, I would encourage you to continue being safe and have, I hope your conference ended well, and I'm hoping that I added to it. So again, thanks for having me, and take care.